Just saying. No,
I have a question for you. Who was Florida State back in the mid to late 70s in football?
No one.
Who was Miami back in the mid to late 70s in college football?
Wrestling with the idea of canceling football altogether.
How did they eventually become a pretty much 30 or so longer year run of hellacious football, national titles, huge wins? People wanted to watch him play. People still want to watch him play. How did that happen?
Well, I mean, they both had because they were independents at the time, the philosophy of playing anybody, anywhere, anytime.
Okay, stop. Others said, okay, because they probably weren't so sure, even though Miami and Florida State had talent. Most of the Florida talent back then, I think, went to everywhere but Florida. Mm-hmm. And to all from Ohio State to Alabama to maybe Georgia or USC or Nebraska and Oklahoma, whoever, right? But they got a chance to play people, and it worked. Now, not everybody's done that. There's other schools that are trying to get to that point by playing anybody. But those two teams would play anybody, and then all of a sudden Miami got the big break. And they played for the national championship and won it and beat a team that was supposed to be the most powerful offense ever. Beat them. It was in their backyard, but they beat them. Florida State started beating teams that they had to play on the road, whether Michigan or whether it was Nebraska or whoever back in the day when they were running college football. They got a chance. Mm-hmm. Who now, outside of who we have established in college football, can have that chance if, in fact, we go to where there's this level and then there's this level?
Well, look, who? Cincinnati is a good example of trying to do this now, because if you ask Cincinnati, even before they joined the Big 12, who do you want to play? And they'd be like, we'll go play them on the moon. Just give us a chance to do it. But now the models are set up to where even before we go to the next phase of this, to where you couldn't do what was done back then. You couldn't fight and scratch and claw your way and, take some lumps, but then all of a sudden, part of the reason that Miami and Florida State started to recruit so well was they also focused their recruiting on certain areas, but they could get those recruits and say, listen, you can come here and we're going to go play in the big house. We're going to go play at USC. We're going to go play these places. We're going to play, and the heck yeah, let's go do it. I want to go beat those teams that maybe didn't recruit me, or I just want to be part of something new. That's really hard to do now because the powers that be don't want to see it happen again. Because if you give people the idea that they could do that again, that they could be an upstart, it's much like economics in this country now. Do you want to start a delivery business right now? Like a to-your-door delivery business, or do you just going to fall to Bezos, right?
Yep.
So, yeah, Alabama's Amazon.com, and it's hard because they're trying to make sure nobody else
They didn't want Florida State and Miami to be a part of it, but they all said, okay, we'll play you, because they were also getting players from their backyard, and they wanted to get more players from their backyard. And then what happened is Florida State and Miami playing that kind of schedule led them to keeping some of those players and eventually beating all the Blue Bloods, or most of them, and had a run that was insane in the 80s, 90s, even into the early 2000s. And, of course, Florida State about a decade ago won a championship again with Jimbo Fisher and also Jameis Winston and company. So I thought about that earlier today. Let's think about teams that weren't and now are, even though Florida State and Miami have been down and others have been down. But they had to go and play, and you can't really almost get that opportunity. Boise State at times has tried it, and everyone wants to point to the win against Oklahoma. It was so dramatic, the two trick plays, et cetera. It worked. But not many people are playing them.
The win against Oklahoma, the best thing it did for Boise State was it made people probably not want to schedule them, but it did help them schedule a couple of good non-conference games that they've had against named teams, because the television networks wanted it to happen.
It put them on the map.
Yeah, put them on the map.
Not that people didn't know about Boise State like they now know about North Dakota State, but that one gave them just so much. It's like getting a brand new renovation of who they were. That all of a sudden people go, who? And with all due respect, we love Jeremiah Dickey and Boise State, but it was like, wow. And they almost get so much credit for that even 10, 15 years later.
Yeah.
Because it was such a wow moment in college football. So that's one of the things I wanted to bring up about, if we're in this arms race, is it possible if college football ends up with this like altitude or atmosphere of only just a certain amount of teams and the elite, can we ever see a Florida State or Miami occur?
I don't think so. And look, Dave Bartoo talked about it yesterday.
I have 1 point. So I'm sorry. And you get to Dave. And that doesn't mean that you can't have teams that go this. But the only reason they mattered is because they were winning the national championship. Not, with all due respect to the other ones who are all important. Kids celebrate, fans celebrate. It's great for the schools, TV coverage, but it was the national championship.
Yeah. No, and it is. They're creating these big, gigantic trusts, which are not good. We are built, the American dream is upward mobility, right, Smokey? That if you work hard and do everything you're supposed to do, that you can achieve that, right? That you could be Elon Musk one day, or you could be Jeff Bezos. And that's not to say that it's impossible, but when those companies, just like, you can be Alabama one day. Well, when Alabama, the corporations that surround Alabama are protecting it from any kind of outside competition, it makes it way harder and a lot less fair to have upward mobility. So, the country's different now. The college football is different now, to where it's kind of mirroring how we are, where we have big, gigantic corporations that are running everything, and a structure that doesn't want to break them up as we did before, because people thought that parity and competition was better for sports, for business, for everything. Now the attitude has changed.
University of Houston trying, they're in the American Conference. They will soon, in a year, they will be a part of the Big 12. Now, if the Big 12 is still a part of that party in a year, 2 or 3 or whenever, and you think it will be, there are some that say no, but I think it will still they'll figure themselves out. They'll get it done, no matter what their decisions are. So, yeah, Houston has a chance to where they were in the late 70s and sometimes in the 80s with Bill Yeoman. But the Miami and Florida State stories were they not only got to a point because they'd play anybody. Houston was a part of a conference at the time, the Southwest Conference, although they weren't always a part of the Southwest Conference, and they got a chance, and they did well, and they beat everybody. We're pretty good about beating people, and so maybe they are that next story. Cincinnati, Paul brought that up as well, from Doug Begin, and that's why ratings will fall all over time. People who feel like they don't have a chance will be resentful and won't watch. Craig's brought that up. From Thomas Moss, we're about to pay players. How many teams left will be able to pay the players? This is NIL-related. Players will get paid and schools won't lose money. We've discussed that many, many times, but we appreciate, Thomas, your comments, along with many, many others.
Here's a great text from the 765. The university should have their own transfer portal for transferring conferences, which the Pac-12 is kind of in right now, aren't they?
Yep.
Aren't the schools all in the Pac-12? They're kind of in the transfer portal, just waiting to hear, stay here, go. Their own. George Kliavkoff has to recruit his own conference, as where everybody else might, be going there like, hey, it might not be so bad to come over here to the Big 12 or the Big 10 or whatever. So, yeah, I think that's kind of what's the kind of new. It's just not official.
And so I got to tell you this as well.